If you've ever been told your feelings were too much, your identity was wrong, or your body was the problem, this one's specifically for you. There's a book that has taken over every airport bookstore, every healing era TikTok, every group chat where someone is going through it. And I've been sitting with how to talk about this one because on the surface, the premise sounds fine. Can't control other people, so stop trying. Okay, sure, I can work with that. But the more I sat with it, the more I kept thinking about my clients, the ones who've already spent their whole lives letting people do whatever they want to them, the ones who came to therapy specifically because they were told their boundaries were the problem, the ones whose nervous systems learned that hypervigilance wasn't anxiety, it was survival. And I realized I can't stay quiet about this one. So let's get into it. My name's Andrew. I am a trauma therapist in the ever on fire United States, and I don't think therapy is neutral, and neither am I. Before I get into the let them theory itself, I want to tell you who I am and who I work with because that context matters for everything I'm about to say. I work specifically with people navigating identity-based trauma, religious deconstruction, cultural displacement, chronic illness, late diagnosed neurodivergence, disability. My clients don't come to me because they're too controlling or too rigid. They come to me because systems, families, churches, medical institutions, or entire cultures have spent years telling them that their needs, their bodies, their identities were the problem, that their responses were wrong, that if they just adjusted their perspective, everything would be fine. That is the lens I'm bringing to Mel Robbins' book, The Let Them Theory. And I want to be clear up front, I'm not saying that this theory is worthless for everyone. I'm saying it's not designed for the people I sit with. And because it's being marketed to everyone, I think that needs to be said out loud. Now, Mel Robbins is a lawyer, not a psychologist, not a therapist, not a counselor. And I want to be careful here because I'm still under supervision myself. I don't have unlimited authority either, but I know what I don't know, and I say so. And that's the distinction I want to draw. She does cite clinicians throughout the book, Gottman researchers, neuroscientists, psychologists, and I respect that she's doing that work. But citing experts is not the same as being a practitioner. It's not the same as sitting with someone through their pain week after week and watching how frameworks land in their bodies and in their real lives. That gap matters, especially when the people reading your book are bringing their deepest wounds into it. And I really want to pause on the title of the book for a second, because the word theory is doing a lot of work here that I don't think is earned. In science, a theory isn't a hunch or a framework someone found to be helpful. A theory is a rigorously tested, evidence-based explanation for how something works. Gravity is a theory. Evolution is a theory. Calling this the let them theory borrows that weight without doing any of the work. It's a reframe. It might be a helpful practice for some people, but it is not a theory in any scientific sense of the word. And that matters to me personally, not just clinically, because I hold a Master of Science in counseling. I chose that program deliberately because I'm tired of people treating psychology like it's not a real science. It's the brain. It's the nervous system. It's understanding why human beings aren't just walking blobs of meat, why we break, why we heal. That is science. And most counseling programs are still Master of Arts degrees. And I have a deep respect for those programs and the clinicians they produce, but I made a specific choice because I believe this field deserves to be held to scientific standards. So when a lawyer writes a book, calls it a theory, and makes sweeping claims about how the human mind works, I clock that. And I notice it because the people actually doing the scientific work of understanding human psychology have earned the word theory. And it shouldn't be borrowed casually to sell books. So Here's the core premise of the book. Most of our stress and unhappiness comes from trying to control things that are fundamentally uncontrollable. Other people's choices, feelings, behavior. The solution? Let them. Stop fighting it. Release the grip. And the book actually does have a second step. It's called Let Me. The idea is that after you release control over others, you take radical ownership of your own responses, your own life, your own choices. That part matters and that part is real. But here's the problem. The catchy half, the viral half, the half that's on the cover and in every TikTok sound is let them. And that's what people walk away with. That's the part that gets applied. And when people are in pain, they apply frameworks rigidly because rigid rules feel safer than nuance when everything is falling apart. The book opens with a story about Mel's son and prom planning, letting him make his own choices, releasing control. Fine, that's an appropriate application. But the person in the self-help aisle at a bookstore is not there because their son is bad at planning prom, okay? They might be there because their partner is emotionally abusive, because they've spent years being told their needs are too much, because they were raised in a high-control religion or culture that taught them self-erasure was holiness, because their body has been dismissed by every doctor they've ever seen. And the book doesn't make that distinction, not in the core framework, not where most people stop reading. Now, I want to get specific here because this is the part that I care most about. From a polyvagal perspective, let them assumes your nervous system is regulated enough to make a conscious choice about detachment. But many of my clients are living in chronic activation, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. That's not a mindset problem. That's a physiological state that tells their bodies, that's a psychological state that their bodies learned in order to survive. Telling someone in that state to simply release their grip isn't a tool. It's a demand that their body literally cannot meet yet. You have to work at the level of the nervous system first. And that's what somatic work, Hakomi, body-centered therapy is doing, helping the body learn it's safe enough to have a choice. Let them skips that entire foundation. And from a somatic lens more broadly, in somatic therapy, we understand that dysregulation doesn't live only in the mind. It lives in the tissue, the breath, the posture. The body organizes itself around what it learned to survive. A framework that says, stop trying to control what others do, lands very differently in a body that learned that hypervigilance was the only way to stay safe, in a body that learned whose footsteps are coming down the hall. For that person, letting go isn't freedom. It can feel like annihilation. It can feel like just letting it happen. There's also something I want to name that doesn't get talked about enough in mainstream self-help, and that's who this advice is actually written for. Let them, as a framework, assumes you've had the luxury of having a self that was never systematically invalidated. It assumes a starting place of relative psychological wholeness. But for people from collectivist cultures, where the boundary between self and community is not a flaw to fix, but a value to honor, this framework can feel like another form of Western individualism being handed to them under the guise of healing. For people whose identities were pathologized by medicine, condemned by religion, or erased by their families, the work isn't learning to let go of control. It's learning they were ever allowed to have needs in the first place. That is a fundamentally different starting place. And this book doesn't recognize that that exists. Now, the book does gesture towards some of this in later chapters. Chapter 18 talks about letting people's actions guide you rather than chasing their potential. Chapter 20 addresses leaving relationships entirely. And there's an appendix for parenting and teams that suggests Robbins knows that context matters, but it's an appendix, and most people don't read the appendix, and none of it is integrated into the core framework in a way that changes how let them actually lands for someone who needs those distinctions the most. Using narrative therapy as a lens, the stories we tell about ourselves are shaped by the systems that raised us. My clients are often coming in with internalized narratives that say that their needs are a burden, their perceptions are wrong, and their identities are problems to be solved. The last thing they need is a framework that, without careful clinical scaffolding, can accidentally become another chapter in that same story. Now, I do genuinely want to be fair because I don't think this theory is worthless, like I said before. I think it's context dependent in a way that the book doesn't fully acknowledge. There are absolutely situations where let them is the right move. Let your adult kids make their own choices. Let your coworker organize their desk however they want. Let go of your grip on outcomes that genuinely aren't yours to control. For a regulated, securely attached person who genuinely overmanages the people around them, this book may be exactly what they need. And I'm not here to take that from anyone. The theory works when the thing you're trying to control is genuinely not your business and genuinely not harming you. It starts to fall apart when what you're really being asked to let go of is your own safety, your own needs, and your own right to be treated with basic dignity. The version of this theory that helps people and the version that harms them are separated by one question alone. Is this situation actually safe for me? And that question never makes it into the core framework. If you're someone who has spent your life being told your perception is wrong, your needs are too much, your body is broken, your identity is a problem, this isn't your book. I don't think this book even knows you exist. Now, look, I understand why this book is everywhere. It's simple, it sounds wise, and a lot of people genuinely do need to loosen the grip they have on controlling things around them. That's real, and that's worth saying. But the work I do is about helping people figure out what they actually need, not what they've been conditioned to tolerate. It's body-based and identity-centered. It starts from the premise that your nervous system's responses make sense, that your need for safety is not controlling behavior, that your identity is not the problem. Let them doesn't start there. And for the people I sit with, that starting place is everything. Self-help from non-clinicians isn't inherently bad, but it lacks some nuance that comes from sitting with other people through their pain over extended periods of time. And nuance is not optional when the stakes are someone's sense of self. So take what's useful. If releasing the anxious grip on what you genuinely cannot control is something you need, that is worth keeping. But don't let them become permission for others to harm you. Don't let it become a reason to stop trusting your own perception. Don't let it become another story you tell yourself about why your needs don't matter, because they do. You deserve relationships and frameworks that start with you, your body, your history, your identity, as something worth protecting, not something that needs to be managed. Therapy isn't neutral, and neither are the books we read. I'll see you next episode.